All right, Chris Benoit. Thoughts on Chris Benoit. This is one of those, if you're a pro wrestling fan, you'll never quite get over the Chris Benoit situation. No matter how you felt about or how you feel about the situation, if you're a wrestling fan from the early mid '90s onward, and you've definitely heard of Chris Benoit as a former WCW World Heavyweight Champion for only basically hours, and he was a former WWE Heavyweight Champion, meaning he was the heavyweight champion. He wasn't the Bruno belt lineage, which I always differentiate. Basically, he had the belt that he won at WrestleMania 20, beating Triple H and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat match. He had that belt, which was the lineage, sort of the WCW title, not even really. So, in my book, Benoit was not a WWE champion, okay? He had that World Heavyweight belt, which was not quite the same, and that's just the way it is. Check your record books. But in any event, he also had the United States Championship. He had the WCW, going back to that part, the TV title, I believe. Did he have the? I think he had the tag team title with Malenko, and I think he and Booker T had that wonderful best of 7 series, which wasn't even for a championship, as I remember it. It was for a shot at a championship held by Rick Martel. And then he and Booker T did another best of 7, I think, for the U.S. title years later in WWE. But anyway, what most people think about when they hear Chris Benoit, if they're not a wrestling fan, but they know the story, is a guy who lost his mind either due to concussions or perhaps steroids, some people speculate, or they did back then, and he killed his wife, he killed his child, he killed himself. Conspiracy theorists love the Benoit story as far as conjecture. Not to say that anyone loves the story, but they love conjecturing about it. Some people have made videos about it and so forth. And all these years later, as a wrestling fan, I still can't wrap my head around it. But I'll say this: obviously, the death of 3 people is horrible, god-awful. And I've listened to probably the best podcast you can listen to about the Benoit deaths is Chris Jericho discussing with Nancy Benoit's sister, and also with Chavo Guerrero, and also Jericho and Dave Meltzer discussing at length Benoit's death and his career and his life. And it gets very muddled because emotionally, no one wants to put over or say how great a guy was, or how, even as a performer, how great he was, if in fact he did kill his wife, kill his child, kill himself. And I don't have any facts or evidence, and now as you get further and further away from what actually happened, there's no way to know what the fuck happened, except to say that it seemed like the case was kind of quickly decided. It was a murder-suicide, a double murder-suicide, and that was that. But a lot of people aren't quite happy with it because it seemed either out of character or the timelines matched up. There was some weird Wikipedia post from some fucking kid about death, I think, to the wife, Nancy Benoit, that just didn't make any sense. I don't really know anything other than to say I have talked very briefly to a woman wrestler at the time who was working for WWE, and she said, I asked her just offhandedly who her favorite wrestler was in the WWE that she worked with, and she said Chris Benoit, and I was kind of surprised she would say that. And then I followed up, what do you think happened? And she said something to the effect, I'm not quoting her, and I'm not going to give her name, but she said something to the effect of she thought there might have been something, an outlier type of situation. She didn't say murder, she didn't say aliens, she didn't say anything about conspiracy, but she thought the thing was a little bit out there, meaning there might be more to it. And that's all I'll say as far as the conspiracy is. I think there's a possibility that there might be more to it. I wouldn't say that I think Benoit necessarily didn't do it or whatever, but there might be more situations to it. One theory that came up, I'm not sure who posted this theory, I can't remember. Someone posted a theory, either on video or in writing, that they thought possibly the wife and child were killed first. Benoit came home, either knew who killed his wife and child or didn't, but in a fit of depression, set up these Bibles near their bodies, and then killed himself with a Bible ready to be in place. The thing with the Bibles is probably the most cryptic and bizarre thing about it, that these three people are dead and they're discovered with these Bibles next to the bodies in a very almost systematic way. Doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, meaning that it doesn't seem like that jives with a traditional death scene that didn't have some other type of interference or something. Presentation seems very presentational is what I'm saying, for an act of rage or passion that's being presented. And passion is not the best word, but there's no good words for this. Switching gears to it's a difficult gear to switch, because it's kind of like talking about, an O.J. Simpson case where you talk about the pop culture references, the societal references, the sadness of death, everything, and then you want to switch gears to a guy's career. Talk about O.J.'s stats and why he never won a Super Bowl. Well, it's a little difficult. But in this particular situation, that it's Chris Benoit, and I'm the one doing this video, what are my thoughts on Chris Benoit? First came under my radar at Super Brawl 3, seeing him go to a 19-minute and 59-second match with Too Cold Scorpio. The match ended with Too Cold actually taking the victory, but I remember always thinking that was a draw, but I guess they did like a 1 second before time limit thing. And that's kind of like the testimony, that match right there, of the young Benoit, who he didn't necessarily have to win the match to go over. And not many guys can pull that off. I mean, if you look at a guy like Chris Benoit or other guys, some like Mick Foley might be in there, some others, but guys who could really make you feel like you wanted to see them wrestle, and they didn't necessarily have to go over. And for instance, an AJ Styles these days, or very few guys have that level of connection or aptitude for wrestling where they don't. It's even better sometimes if they don't win. A guy like Triple H could take some lessons from these guys. WrestleMania 19 against Booker T, obviously. So moving forth, Benoit. I kind of didn't see him for a while. He was doing the whole ECW, the early days of ECW. A team that really would have been great. Shane Douglas, Dean Malenko, and Chris Benoit as the original triple threat. But as Shane Douglas described, that team barely got off the ground because, basically, Benoit and Malenko went over to WCW. WCW Benoit. The Four Horsemen thing for him, initially it got a real slow start because they had Pillman and Benoit and Arn and Flair as the Horsemen. I think that's the lineup. And it was almost like, before you knew it, Pillman was gone. And then a year later, Arn was injured. And they had Mongo in the mix. And Mongo and Benoit were just so off-putting together. It's like you have one of the best guys there is in Benoit as far as pure athleticism, and you have Mongo, who was a fun guy, I guess, but he always had that little dog, and he just wasn't quite there. And I think they had Deborah McMichael floating around. I don't know. I mean, eventually, a year later, late 97, they kind of rebooted that version of the Horsemen with Dean Malenko in the mix, and it got to be a little bit better. Because Malenko and Benoit had a real chemistry. I mean, those guys understood each other. They were on similar paths. They were a Tully and Arn type. Malenko, to his credit, somehow won, for what it's worth, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Wrestler of the Year, 1997. So he had that cachet. Then you start getting into things with the Radicals. But before that, even, you had, Evolution, which was Shane Douglas, I believe Malenko, Benoit, and Perry Saturn. And that was a cool group. I liked that group in WCW, I want to say late 99, early 2000. I like that group a lot, and then they kind of switched up the gears. And as we all know, long story short, Benoit wins the WCW title, making Big Sid tap out. Sid's got his foot under the rope, and then next thing you know, Benoit's over in WWE. And of course, what I left out, the giant thing, the elephant in the fucking blog, was Benoit's relationship with Nancy Sullivan, who became Nancy Benoit, and all the horrible things that would happen. So, as a fan, I wouldn't say Benoit was ever one of my top favorites, but he wasn't a least favorite either. I mean, I did cheer when he beat Triple H and Michaels. I did enjoy that. When he and Malenko won the WCW Tag Team Championships years earlier, that seemed like an accomplishment. That seemed like something that was exciting and innovative. So, I mean, I think you can definitely say that for fellow fans, and especially for the fans I guess I'd reach out to that are huge Chris Benoit supporters, even today, don't feel bad about watching those tapes. Don't feel bad about enjoying Chris Benoit matches. If you have him on tape, if you have DVDs of Benoit matches, or if you find yourself on YouTube watching them, don't feel bad. I guess I would kind of put the brakes on. I never am one of those types in a wrestling thread where people are, listing your top 5 scientific wrestlers of all time, and someone inevitably has to say Benoit or put a gif of Benoit. There are certain people that like to just provoke the conversation, and I guess I could be accused of that for doing this video, of just mentioning Benoit out of no fucking reason, just mentioning Chris Benoit, and just provoking his likeness or that story just as a way to kind of irritate people or rub salt to their wound. But I think that's something I typically don't do that. But I mean, I think to me, no matter how you look at it, it's not good. The fact is, a child died, a woman died, a man died. Was it murder? Was it suicide? Was it some combination of both? It's always going to be impossible for any of us to know because none of us were there. But I do say that for those that experienced the career of Chris Benoit, you did see a master technician. You saw a guy who really, from all signs, loved the business, honored the spirit of Dynamite Kid in his wrestling. And I'm trying to think if I have a personal favorite Chris Benoit memory, but it's not even wrestling related. When I was a youth, when I was a young man, you have what's called, you're trying to engage in activities with young women amongst, friends, high school, college, whatever. And one thing that was a running joke was cock blocking, because we had a guy who liked to cock block. He liked to, go out of his way to interfere with people trying to engage in activities, and we called this guy a cock blocker. And eventually I was trying to call him out on it and say, and because it was this kind of a social situation where this guy was about to be guilty, about to practice his cock blocking. And I said, hey man, no CB. And he was like, what? And there's girls around, there's women around. You don't want to kind of break the code, but I said no CB, no Chris Benoit. And it just kind of came to me, the CB, the cock blocking, the Chris Benoit, and then that just became our running joke where any time someone was a cock blocker, we would use the term Benoit. Hey, no Benoit. It's a Benoit free zone. It's a Benoit free weekend. It's a Benoit free party. So we would just have this cock block thing, Chris Benoit, cock blocking, no Benoiting, and we just use the term Benoiting as a way of referencing cock blocking. And it just was humorous. It was fun. And this was, well before the situation, the death. So obviously that puts a whole other spin on it historically. But as far as matches, I actually do like the match where he beat Sid, to tell you the truth. I thought that Benoit got a great match out of Sid. I thought that the dynamic of the big man, little man in that match was fantastic. I remember watching that match at the time, and WCW was just barely holding on for some life. And it was kind of like how Impact Wrestling's been for a while, where the hardcore fans are cheering for this federation or this promotion to get its act together, despite all signs that it never will. So in that match, I liked Benoit's performance. The sadly enough, the Owen Hart tribute match on Nitro, Chris Benoit versus Bret Hart. And apparently Bret wanted to put over Benoit, but Benoit insisted that he was going to get pinned, and he did so. And it's very sad and ironic that Benoit and Bret had that match out of tribute to Owen, and lo and behold, Chris ends up passing away or dying or killed himself or whatever. The Benoit, I mean, here's a match that you've got to see if you haven't. Benoit and Jericho versus Triple H and Steve Austin for the tag team championships, the quad injury for Triple H. I mean, that's, if you want to see four guys on all cylinders, height of, I don't know if that would still be considered Attitude Era or just past Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression Era, or the in-between era, but that match was great. And the first ever Money in the Bank match, I want to say it's the WrestleMania 21. A year after Benoit was world champion, and now he's kind of pushed back to the upper mid card, and here he is in this ladder match, which I believe he was in, which is fantastic. I mean, Kurt Angle, WrestleMania 17, okay? Those guys had a bunch of matches around that time. So reading one of Chris Jericho's books and how he in one of Jericho's books, he was very angry about the fact that his history, meaning Jericho's, pronouns pal, was being sacrificed because of the Benoit situation. And Jericho's very adamant and very upset. And I couldn't blame him for that because it's his history too, And I felt that if you really think about it, the amount of great matches, I mean, that would be like equivalent if you took away all the Bruno matches or all the Flair matches or all the Hogan matches. For all those guys. And Jericho has a solid point. Some of his best work as a performer was with, Chris Benoit. So why should his matches have the botchy audio or the botchy commentary or not be in the network search engine or whatever? Nothing that Jericho did, nothing that anybody did. On the flip side of that, you got to respect that there's some thought to it from WWE that they don't necessarily want to be associated with this. Sometimes people get all hung up about the William Regal, interview segment on the Benoit tribute show after Benoit died. I don't know. I mean, sometimes people say things and they're caught up in the moment, and they who knows what Regal knew or he didn't know. But it doesn't set off my red flags that much. I've watched it. All I would say is, to people who may be watching this video and are disgusted that I'm even doing it, or disgusted that, but this is the thing, you're a wrestling fan, you think about these things. It comes to your mind. I would just say that you can respect the guy's body of work, you can respect him for who he was, and you can either be angry or disgusted at the deaths, or what I try to do in this particular situation, but not on all situations, I try to keep an open mind. Just because in my book, it's such a bizarre case, that thing, not to harp on it, but the thing with those perfectly presented Bibles next to the bodies, it's so cryptic and weird. It seems on that level that if you were just to tell me that, these three bodies were there and there's three Bibles, presented next to the bodies, I would think it was a hit, some type of weird kill. I wouldn't think it was a murder-suicide. It doesn't seem logical. But listening, on the other hand, to Nancy Benoit's sister and Chavo, they all kind of think it was what it was presented to be. At least I don't want to quote them, but that's the impression I got from listening to those things. For the guys that worked with Chris Benoit, and I never met him, I never would even be, in the same building with him. I would say, except as a fan, I'd say that those guys probably know best what they think. I think Miz was trying to tell some stories about getting, a little bit bullied or harassed when he first started, and he didn't want to say it was Benoit, but eventually it was kind of revealed that it probably was. But it seemed like Benoit had high standards for everybody, which I can appreciate. And I just say that for me, once again, I try not to judge a guy his whole life for the acts, the horrible acts of the weekend of his death, which we still don't know exactly what the fuck happened, and we never will. So I leave that as a kind of a hanging chad, so to speak. Maybe a poor taste of words on my part, but just we don't really fucking know. So let's try not to judge other than to say it's not good to have all these concussions. It's not good, regardless if that's what happened to him or not. It's not good to take steroids, regardless if that was part of his deal or not. It's not good to kill people. And it's, but, you know, if this video, for any fan out there, enjoy your Chris Benoit matches. Enjoy them. Don't harp on them, but enjoy the fact that he gave his all to this business of pro wrestling. And we did see a great wrestler, you know, for that time. And also a woman, you know, Nancy Benoit. She underrated career in my book. I think she was a pioneer of the woman's role in wrestling as a heel woman's valet / manager. I think she had a great thing. And as far as their son, just a tragedy for this young guy who really never had a chance to live his life because of this horrible situation. So that's it. That's my thoughts on Chris Benoit. For whatever the fuck reason, real wrestling fans know sometimes you can't control your wrestling thoughts. Sometimes these thoughts just bubble into your brain, and you either address them or you don't. But I thought I'd share with you because for whatever reason, Chris Benoit came to mind today. Rest in peace to the family and that died. Nancy, the son. Daniel, I believe, was his name, and to Chris, and hopefully the family members that remain, the sister and everyone, hopefully they've put that, not to say behind them, it'll never be behind them, but somehow they've found some coping mechanisms or something to enjoy life, because it's fleeting. That's Mike Messier. Enjoy your weekend.